Everyone, and welcome to Week 10. This video will cover variances. When a company evaluates variances, it's looking for changes to their expectations. Once they identify anomalies, they need to know if the anomaly is a best practice or an area of concern. Specifically, they're asking, what caused this variance and what can we do about it? So we are going to do the same thing today in this video. Let's go ahead and get started. In our problem set, we work for a company called Feeling Good Medical. They manufacture disposable medical supplies. So we're going to prepare the following factory overhead cost budget for the assembly department for October. The company expected to operate the department at 100% of normal capacity, and that normal capacity was expected to be 30,000 hours. We have a list of variable costs and a list of fixed costs. And these variable costs are based on the expectation that we will operate at 100% of normal capacity. So our total factory overhead cost was projected to be $729,000. During October, though, things changed. The department operated at 28,500 hours versus the 30,000 hours. And then we had changes in the costs that were incurred. And we'll actually list all of these changes in our report below. So what is our job? Our job is to prepare a factory overhead cost variance report for October. So to be useful for cost control, the budgeted amounts should be based on the 28,500 hours, and we'll walk through how to do that. When we calculate our variances, favorable variances are expressed as a negative number, and unfavorable is expressed as a positive number, which feels different, but we'll get through it. So, I'm really big on interim calculations. So I went ahead and performed some interim calculations. First, I wanted to know what my normal capacity for the month was. That was 30,000 hours. But our actual production for the month was only 28,500. Now I wanted to look at what should my standards be based on this new mix. So I have my indirect factory wages, power and light, and indirect materials. We'll talk about fixed factory overhead rate in a moment. So how did I get the 825? Let me scroll up just a tiny bit. I took what I projected to pay, which was $247,500, and I divided it by the normal capacity for the month, which was 30,000 hours. That tells me that it really should be $8.25. That's what we should charge for each hour. For power and light, $630, it's the same thing. I'm picking up the $189, which was my expected cost for the month, again, based on 30,000 hours. So it's $6.30 per hour. And my indirect materials should be about $1.75. Again, I'm taking my 52,500 and dividing it by the 30,000. Again, we're going to come back to the fixed factory overhead rate in just a moment. All right, now it's time for us to actually put our report together. So again, this is the Feeling Better Medical report. This is the factory overhead cost variance report for the assembly department, and this is for the month ending October. These are the actual costs that we were provided. So I'm going to scroll up again. And that all of these numbers that I just highlighted are in this green section. This is the actual costs that were incurred during the month of October. So our indirect factory wages, $234, power and light, $178,500, and indirect materials, $50,600. All right. And that gives us a total of $463,100. For our fixed costs, that stayed the same. So this amount right here is the same amount that is listed above, right here. And that didn't change. So $740. So our total factory overhead cost was $703,100. All right, but this is our actual cost. We need to know, what should we have budgeted if we knew in advance that we were not going to operate at 100% capacity? How do I perform those calculations? Well, remember, I did some interim calculations up here to establish my standards. So now I'm simply going to take the fact that my indirect factory wages should have been $8.25 per hour. I'm going to multiply that by the actual hours that we were in production, and that gives me $235,125. I'm going to pause here. We can see that we budgeted for $234, but we should have budgeted for $235. This gives me a favorable variance of $1,125. For power and light, I budgeted $178. But again, I'm picking up the $630 and I'm multiplying it by the $28,500, and that gives me the $179,550. Again, I take the difference between these two, and I have a variance. Now my indirect materials, same thing. I multiplied my 1.75 by the 28.5 or 28,500 hours, and that gave me an unfavorable variance of $725. Again, let's pause and let's talk about what could have caused these variances. Well, for one, let's go with power and light. This is actually one that we see often, especially in California. We could actually see this favorable variance because maybe we began changing out our light bulbs, and now we're using more energy efficient light bulbs, which translates into savings for our power and light. Maybe we decided that, we weren't going to use our lights during the day because we have enough natural light coming in through the windows. For indirect materials, we see that this is unfavorable, right? What could have caused the unfavorable variance? Well, it could be that when we ordered some of this indirect materials, that what we received was, suboptimal materials. Maybe it broke. The wood was not well made. The plastics were flimsy. If it's a bakery, then maybe the flour that we received was spoiled. So these are the things that we will identify during this variance report when we're evaluating these variances. The first step, though, is the calculation. All right, so we've calculated this first portion. We have our favorable variances and our unfavorable variances. Nothing changed, right, with our fixed costs, because we know that it's fixed. It's not going to change, based on how many hours we actually work in the production floor. But what we want to do is we want to see, how should we have used our fixed costs? And that is where I performed this interim calculation for fixed factory overhead rate. How did I get that? I took the 240 and I divided it by the 30,000 hours. This tells me that my fixed factory overhead rate should be about $8. We're going to come down here and we're going to talk about our idle time. For our idle time, I took that $8 and I looked at the difference between where we should have been, which is the 30,000 hours, and what we actually performed, which was the 28,500 hours. And I multiplied that by the $8. Those are your idle hours. The difference between normal and actual capacity is your idle time. Now we know if we have idle time, that's naturally going to be an unfavorable variance, right? Because we should have used 100% of capacity, but we didn't. Now I'm going to come here to our net controllable variance, and this is just a sum of those two. My favorable variance, again, is just a sum of those. And then my net controllable, I'm just looking at my unfavorable and my favorable variance, and that gives me my net controllable variance. So we've calculated the controllable variance, and we've looked at each individual line item. We've also looked at the volume variance, which is our idle hours. Now when I sum these two numbers, the favorable $1,450 and the unfavorable $12,000, it gives me a total factory overhead cost variance of $10,550, which is unfavorable. One of the reasons that we break these two apart, the controllable and the volume variance, is because the production floor is responsible for actually the variable piece, right? That's what the production floor is responsible for, making sure that they are using their indirect factory labor correctly, that they are being responsible with their power and light, and that they are managing their indirect materials. This volume variance, aka the idle hours, could be a result of either production or it could be a sales problem. So the sales department may not have generated enough sales for the production department to actually use 100% of their capacity. If that were the case, then leadership would look to the sales department and say, is there anything that we can do to help you, maintain sales at our expected rate? However, we might also find out that the idle hours were due to maybe poor maintenance with the equipment. Maybe we find out in our investigation that we have a preventive maintenance contract, but maybe the contractor is not performing all of the maintenance that we've listed in our contract. This is that opportunity to identify that issue, work with the contractor so that they are performing the maintenance that they need to perform in order to keep our machines moving. Again, the idle hours may have come because the preventive maintenance didn't occur, which meant that the equipment broke down throughout the month of October. All right, so the variance reports are great, not just from a calculation standpoint, but it does help us find out what are our best practices, what are our areas of concern. Again, area of concern here would be our idle time. Best practice, we may find out that just the assembly department changed out their light bulbs and they've saved money. We could take that best practice and distribute it across the rest of the production floor, and we may be able to realize a lot of savings. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.